is Sheryl Shaw. I'm the chairman of the Chambers County Historical Commission here in Anahuac, Texas. And I have with me our vice chairman, Gilbert Speights, on the camera. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Native Americans that once lived here in our area. Many times when we say the words early Texas history, we think of the Alamo and the Texas Revolution back in 1836. But there were Native American people living here for thousands of years before Europeans arrived, before Texas was even Texas. Choctaw, Comanche, and Caddo are some of the more well-known native tribes that lived here in what we now call Texas. You may have heard that the Karankawa roamed the Gulf Coast in our area, and that is true. But the Karankawa's main territory was Galveston Island, and south, all the way along the Texas coast to South Padre Island. Today, however, we're going to talk about the Atakapas people who ruled the lands along the upper Texas coast, including what is now Chambers County. There were other communities and related tribes who shared a similar language with the Atakapa. They were up around what is now Wallaceville, where there was a Spanish mission, but that mission will be a separate story. The Atakapas territory stretched along the coast of Louisiana and the upper Texas coast, here where we live. In 1721, a French explorer, Jean-Baptiste de la Harpe, encountered a group of about 200 Atakapas at Round Point, which is between Anahuac and Oak Island. He tried to convince some of them to return with him to France, but they refused, so he tried to capture them, but they luckily escaped. An early French artist drew this depiction of an Atakapa man. They were tattooed and wore little clothing in the summer. They used the stiff hair from a deer tail and other animals to create a hairpiece that sat on top of their head, like a mohawk look. They called themselves Ishak, which means the people, and the emphasis on that is on the second syllable, so it should be said Ishak. The Choctaw called them Atakapa, which means man-eater, but many researchers feel this was likely meant to describe the Karankawa. And even then it is important to remember that Kapesa de Vaca lived with the Karankawa for years and traveled with them extensively, and never once mentioned in his journal anything about man-eaters. There are eyewitnesses that say yes, there was some consumption of flesh of their enemies among the Atakapas, and others that say just the opposite, that the Atakapa greeted strangers with kindness and offerings of food and shelter. One French explorer, Louis Milfort, encountered some Atakapa in his travels and said the Atakapa told him that they only took such drastic retaliation against those who had caused them so much suffering in the past, but never against peaceful travelers. Milford was surprised to find a white man named Joseph living with the Atakapa and offered to take Joseph home with them. Joseph said he was happy and did not want to leave. He had 6 children that he loved very much and wanted to spend the rest of his days with his children and the Atakapa people. The Atakapas Ishak that lived along the coast of Louisiana called themselves the Sunrise people, and the Texas tribes called themselves the Sunset people. They did not live in teepees. They lived in dome-shaped homes made out of bent saplings and cane, covered with hides and leaves. Sometimes they would build a structure with a floor that is raised up a little bit off the ground and build a smoky fire next to it so that the smoke would circle around them and help keep away the mosquitoes. In addition to fish, clams, and oysters, they ate deer, ducks, geese, and other game that was plentiful here. One important food source were the large, powerful alligators that cruised along the waterways. They hunted with long spears and bows and arrows. They also used nets to catch fish. For transportation, they walked and used canoes. According to one explorer, the young Atakapa sometimes even hunted buffalo and followed the herds as far north as Missouri. The Atakapas Ishak were grouped into communities called bands, and each band assumed the name of an animal that was important to them. The 6 bands were heron, snake, redbird, eagle, panther, and alligator. Like other native people, the Atakapas population was reduced so much by disease introduced by foreigners, and they were forced to leave their lands. But they are not extinct. As one book put it, they are forgotten but not gone. They still live in the same areas as their ancient ancestors and still assume the names of the same bands. The heron band lives along the plains near Opelousas, Louisiana. During ancient times, these people would paint their legs black during times of sadness and mourning, so that their legs resembled the long black legs of a heron. Along the marshes of south-central Louisiana, near Bayou Teche, the bayou twists and winds like a snake, so the Atakapas there call themselves the Snake Band. The Redbird Band lives in the western part of Louisiana, near what is now Lake Charles. There were thousands of these beautiful birds everywhere in those days. The Alligator Band lives along Vermilion Bay in South Louisiana. In the old days, the Atakapas used every part of the alligator. They ate the meat, of course, and they used the claws and teeth in various ways. The scales of the gator's skin were formed into spear and arrowheads. The oil was used for cooking and to treat skin conditions, and the fat was a mosquito repellent. Imagine how huge the gators were hundreds of years ago. Imagine having to hunt them with only a spear and a canoe. The Atakapas in Texas were the Panther Band, so named for the powerful cats that prowled along the Sabine River and into East Texas, stalking through the thick woods, their green eyes shining as they waited for prey. The Eagle Band lives between the Calcasieu Lake and Sabine Lake in western Louisiana. Eagles used to soar across these lakes in great numbers. The principal chief of all of the Atakapas people is called by the name Crying Eagle, because many years ago, in the ancient days, there was a powerful chief who could mimic the scream of an eagle. So ever since then, the title has been passed down from one chief to the next throughout the generations. The current chief Crying Eagle lives in Lake Charles. His English name is George Christian, but we call him Chief Crying Eagle. He has been our guest several times at Gatorfest. He once brought their shaman as well, Mr. Papillon. Because they have been pushed further and further off their ancient lands, the Atakapas intermarried with other Native American tribes, African Americans, Cajuns, and others. Over the years, many of their old ways were almost lost. However, they have begun reclaiming their language and are publishing a vocabulary book. Here you can see a few words describing some colors and parts of the body, but I will not even try to pronounce them. The names of many Louisiana places are from the Atakapas language, like Mermentau, Bayou Teche, and Calcasieu. Calcasieu means the land of he who cries like an eagle. The word jambalaya, not the food but the word, is a blend of Atakapas words meaning be full, not skinny, eat up, and it's their way of saying bon appetit. One symbol their people used in the past was the corn wheel of life. The four colors represent the elements: red for fire, white for wind, purple for earth, and blue for the water. In the middle of the wheel is a sprout of corn in various stages of its life: a sprouting seed, a young plant, a mature plant that produces corn and then returns to the ground as seed once more, symbolic of the stages of our human life as well. The Atakapas people now have a ceremonial gathering once a year with the Opelousas people in Louisiana. They have dancing and crafts, and they teach each other the old traditions so that their young people can learn their ways and the customs do not disappear. In 2006, they met as a nation for the first time in 200 years. They have a website online where you can learn more and several books have been written about their history and culture. The United States even named a battleship after them. Look up the legend of the Loup-Garou, Loupgarou, a werewolf that is said to roam the marshes of the Atakapas lands in Louisiana. Our historical commission is waiting on a painting from Gary Zaboli showing an Atakapas Ishak hunter. We plan to put a wayside sign featuring the painting at the park in Anahuac so everyone can learn about these fascinating people and their culture. So the next time you stand on the banks of the Trinity Bay and admire the colors that are spilling into the water by the setting sun, remember the people who stood at that spot long before you. They lived, hunted, fell in love, and raised families right here where we are now. The Atakapas Ishak, the people of the sunset. Thank you for joining us. This is Sheryl and Gilbert hunting for history.